Chapter 1. Roots of Resilience. In the heart of Oakland, California, a child was born, a child whose story would one day reach the far corners of the world. Kamala Devi Harris, born to immigrant parents with hearts full of hope and courage, would grow up with dreams as big as the California sky. Her mother, Shamala, and her father, Donald, each came from distant lands, India and Jamaica, carrying their own stories, their own struggles, and their own dreams. Together, they would raise Kamala and her younger sister, Maya, in a home that echoed with music, laughter, and, most importantly, purpose. Kamala's mother, Shamala Gopalan, was a force of nature. A brilliant scientist, passionate and determined, she had come to the United States to study, her mind set on making a difference. Shamala was more than a scientist, though. She was an activist, a woman who knew what it meant to fight for justice, to stand up, to be heard. She filled Kamala's world with tales of her homeland, stories of powerful women, stories of courage and sacrifice. "Remember, Kamala," she would say, "you may be the first, but make sure you were not the last." Those words would echo in Kamala Eo's heart, words she would carry for the rest of her life. And Kamala's father, Donald Harris, a Jamaican-born economist, shared with his daughters the pride of their heritage. He taught them about Jamaica's struggles, its culture, its deep, proud history. Kamala grew up knowing she was part of something larger, a legacy of people who refused to be silenced. Her father, too, was an activist, involved in the civil rights movements that were shaking America at its core. As a young girl, Kamala would march alongside her parents, her small hand held firmly, surrounded by voices chanting for justice, for equality. In those moments, she felt her heart beat faster, her spirit growing stronger. But life was not easy for Kamala's family. Her parents faced discrimination, challenges that seemed insurmountable. They were people of color, immigrants, standing out in a world that was not always welcoming. Kamala saw the pain in her mother's eyes, the resilience in her father's stance, and from this she learned to stand tall, to be proud of who she was, to fight for what was right. As Kamala grew, so did her curiosity. She was a bright child, always asking questions, her mind always searching for answers. She would sit on the floor, wide-eyed, as her mother spoke about civil rights, justice, and the importance of speaking up. "Kamala," her mother would say softly, "I never let anyone tell you who you are. You decide that, and only you." These words were powerful. They were transformative. Little Kamala held them close, words that would become a foundation, a shield, a source of strength. In school, Kamala faced her own battles. As a young Black and South Asian girl, she often found herself at odds with the world around her. But she was fearless. She stood her ground, even when it was tough, even when it would have been easier to stay quiet. She faced questions, assumptions, and sometimes even outright hostility. But Kamala's heart was strong, her spirit unbreakable. She knew she was part of something much greater. At home, Kamala Eo's world was a tapestry of cultures, colors, and flavors. Her mother Eos' kitchen filled with the scent of spices, the warmth of Indian meals, a reminder of her heritage. And from her father, Eos' side, she learned to appreciate the rhythm, the vibrancy, the spirit of Jamaica. This blend of worlds wasn't confusing for Kamala. It was empowering. It gave her a sense of belonging, a sense of pride in the richness of her background. Her family taught her that diversity was not something to hide. It was something to celebrate. But perhaps the most significant lesson Kamala learned was resilience. Life wasn't easy for her family, yet they faced every challenge with heads held high. She watched her mother work tirelessly, balancing the demands of science, motherhood, and activism. She watched her father, too, speaking out, defending his beliefs, unafraid of the obstacles in his path. Kamala knew, even as a young girl, that courage was not just about speaking out. It was about enduring, about holding on to hope, even in the face of adversity. As Kamala moved through her teenage years, she began to understand the true depth of her family, Eos' struggles. Her parents separated, and the weight of this change was heavy. Yet Kamala and Maya stayed strong, bound together by the lessons their parents had taught them. They leaned on each other, finding strength in their bond, resilience in their shared dreams. Kamala learned that even when life seems to fall apart, family, love, and purpose can be the glue that holds everything together. In these years, Kamala began to form her vision, a sense of purpose that would guide her in the years to come. Her mother would often remind her, "You must fight for the things you care about, but you must do it in a way that others will want to join you." Kamala carried these words in her heart, words that would guide her as she stepped into the world beyond her family, Eos' home. Kamala Eos' journey was just beginning, but the roots of resilience, the roots of strength, were already firmly planted. She knew her path would not be easy, that the challenges ahead would be daunting, yet she was ready, ready to stand, ready to fight, ready to make a difference. The spirit of her mother, Eos' homeland, the pride of her father, Eos' culture, and the lessons of her childhood, all these would become the building blocks of her life. In Oakland, under the California sun, a young girl with big dreams had taken her first steps on a path that would one day lead her to the halls of power. She didn't know then where her journey would take her. She didn't know she would make history, that she would stand where no woman had stood before. But she did know one thing. She knew she was destined for something greater. And with every step, with every struggle, Kamala Harris would prove that resilience, true resilience, is born from the roots of one Eos past. Chapter 2. A Girl Who Stood Tall. Oakland was alive, alive with energy, with voices, with dreams. And in the middle of it all was young Kamala Harris, a girl who stood just a little taller than most, because she believed in something bigger. From an early age, Kamala was fearless. She had a way of looking at the world that was different, a spark in her eyes, a fierceness in her voice. She wasn't just any child. Kamala had a voice that demanded to be heard, a curiosity that could never be contained. Kamala Eos days were filled with learning and laughter, but also AP with questions. She was the kind of child who wanted to know everything. Why? She, Eod, asked her mother, why are things like this? She wanted to understand the world, to dig deep, to uncover the truth. And Shamala, her mother, would answer, explaining the world, "Wos injustices" in words Kamala could understand. She told Kamala about the struggles of women, about the fights for freedom, about what it meant to stand up, even when the odds were against you. These conversations planted seeds. Seeds that would grow into a mission, a purpose. At school, Kamala didn't just sit in her seat quietly. No, not Kamala. She was the girl who raised her hand, who wasn't afraid to speak up, who wanted her classmates to think, to feel, to understand. Even when others laughed or ignored her, she kept going, kept pushing. Some days were tough. Some days it felt like no one else understood her. But Kamala knew she was different, and she knew, deep inside, that one day, that difference would matter. There was a certain strength in Kamala, a strength that others could see. Teachers noticed it. Friends felt it. Kamala was the girl who brought everyone together, the one who made others feel seen, heard. When a classmate was teased or bullied, Kamala would be there, standing by their side, unafraid to challenge anyone who dared to hurt another. "No one," Eod say. "Who deserves to be treated like that?" "Who?" Her words were simple, but her heart was fierce. She was young, yes, but already she understood the power of standing up for others. And at home, Kamala continued to learn from her mother, her hero, her guide. Shamala was not only her mother, she was her inspiration, her example of strength. You'd watch as her mother came home from work, exhausted but smiling, always ready to sit with Kamala and Maya, to ask about their day, to remind them of their worth. "Remember who you are, Kamala," Shamala would say softly. "You are strong, you are brave, and you are never alone." There was one memory that stayed with Kamala. A memory of a rally her mother had taken her to when she was just a small girl. She remembered the crowds, the signs, the powerful voices shouting for justice. She could feel the energy, the urgency, the importance of that moment. Her mother, Eos' hand, held hers tightly as they marched together. She looked up and saw the determination in her mother, Eos' eyes, the strength in every step. That day, young Kamala felt something change. A fire lit inside her, a fire that would never die. As she grew, so did her sense of purpose. She wasn't just a girl anymore. She was a girl with a mission, a girl who knew she was meant to make a difference. When she walked into a room, people noticed her. She had a presence, a confidence, a power that seemed to say, "I am here, and I am not going anywhere." But Kamala wasn't arrogant. She was kind, humble, and always willing to listen. She believed that everyone had something to teach, something to share, and she made others feel valued. High school was a time of discovery, of challenges, of finding her voice. Kamala joined clubs, led groups, took on responsibilities that many avoided. She wanted to change things, to make her school, her community, a better place. She organized discussions, invited people to speak, brought together students from different backgrounds. She, Eo'd say, we are all part of this, and if we done, Eo't work together, nothing will change. Her words were simple, but they carried weight, a weight that others felt deeply. Outside of school, Kamala continued to march in rallies, to speak at events, to listen to the voices around her. She learned that real change, real, lasting change, didn't happen overnight. It was a journey, a struggle, something you had to fight for every single day. She saw her mother balancing work, activism, and parenting with grace and determination. And Kamala learned that if she wanted to be a leader, she would have to face challenges head-on, with courage and resilience. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Kamala, Eo's mother, looked at her with a seriousness Kamala hadn't seen before. "Kamala," Shamala said softly, "oh, you have a gift to speak, to lead, to inspire. Never waste it." Kamala looked down, feeling the weight of those words. She didn't fully understand then, but deep down, she knew that her mother was right. She had something special, and she would one day have to use it. Years passed, and Kamala continued to grow, to learn, to challenge herself. Her family was her anchor, her source of strength, and her dreams were becoming clearer every day. She knew she wanted to help people, to stand up for justice, to make the world a better place. But how? She didn't have all the answers yet, but she was ready to find them, ready to take on whatever came her way. One thing was certain. Kamala was a girl who stood tall, a girl who wouldn't back down, a girl with a vision. She was still young, still learning, but her heart was set on something bigger. She didn't know exactly where life would take her, but she knew. She knew she was meant for something great. And with each step, each challenge, each victory, Kamala Harris was moving closer to becoming the woman who would one day inspire millions. In those early years, Kamala learned the most important lesson of all, that true strength isn't just about speaking loudly. It's about standing firm even when no one else is standing with you. She was learning to be brave, to be resilient, to be the kind of leader who listens, who cares, who fights for others. Kamala wasn't just a girl. She was a force, a promise, a symbol of what was possible. And as she looked to the future, she knew that her journey was only beginning. Chapter 3. Crossroads of Cultures. Kamala Harris, a name that would one day echo across continents, across cultures. But before she became the Kamala the world knew, she was just a young girl, standing at the crossroads of two powerful, vibrant heritages. She was part of her mother Eo's India, with its deep traditions, rich flavors, and ancient stories. And she was part of her father Eo's Jamaica, with its music, pride, and strength. Kamala lived in both worlds, carrying them within her like treasures, gifts that would shape her life and her journey. From her mother, Eo's side, Kamala learned about India Eo's past, a past filled with strong women, like her grandmother, a woman who had raised her daughters to be fearless. Shamala would tell her stories of India, stories of struggle, of independence, of a people who fought for freedom with courage and unity. She, Eod, described the sounds, the colors, the festivals, filling Kamala, Eos' young mind, with images of far-off places that felt like home. And there, in the heart of those stories, Kamala found a part of herself, a part that was rooted, proud, unbreakable. Shamala also shared her language, teaching Kamala words from Tamil, her native tongue. Kamala would repeat them eagerly, proud to learn the language of her ancestors. Amma, she, Aod, call her mother, the Tamil word for mom, feeling a warmth, a connection. This word, simple yet powerful, tied her to her mother, Eos' homeland, in a way that words in English could not. Through language, Kamala began to understand the richness of her identity. She was not just American. She was a daughter of India, and that would always be a part of her. From her father, Eos' side, Kamala discovered the rhythms of Jamaica. Donald Harris, her father, would play reggae music, the soulful sounds of Bob Marley, Peter Tosh, songs that spoke of freedom, resilience, unity. He, Aod, tell her tales of Jamaica, Eos Hills, its people, the fight for independence that mirrored her mother, Eos' stories of India. Kamala loved listening to these stories, each one a thread that wove together her heritage. "We are a proud people," her father would say. "Never forget that." Kamala Eos' Jamaican heritage gave her strength, pride, and a fierce sense of justice. In Jamaica, Eos' history, she saw people who stood tall, who demanded respect, who refused to be treated as less than they were. Her father, Eos' words, stayed with her, becoming a part of her heart, a part of the fire that pushed her forward. And the music. Oh, how she loved the music. It reminded her of her roots, of the spirit of the Caribbean, of a place that would always be a part of her, no matter where life took her. Growing up in Oakland, Kamala Eos' world was a colorful blend of cultures, a beautiful mosaic of voices, traditions, and beliefs. She didn't see it as unusual. To her, it was natural. She had Indian relatives, Jamaican relatives, American friends, each bringing something unique, something precious. Her family celebrated Diwali, the Indian festival of lights, filling their home with the glow of candles and the warmth of tradition. And they also celebrated Christmas and Kwanzaa, honoring her father, Eos' roots, and the rich history of African Americans. These traditions from different corners of the world made Kamala feel whole, complete. But living in multiple worlds wasn't always easy. There were moments when people asked questions that were sharp, sometimes hurtful. "Where are you really from?" they ask, as if she didn't belong. "What are you?" they say, as if her identity needed an explanation. Kamala felt the sting of those words, the confusion, the frustration. She knew she was American, but she was also Indian, also Jamaican. And while some people didn't understand, Kamala stood firm, knowing that she was a blend, a bridge, a unique voice that carried the strength of all her roots. In school, Kamala faced moments of loneliness, times when others didn't quite see her as one of them. She wasn't just black, she wasn't just Indian, and she was certainly not the same as the other American kids around her. But Kamala learned to embrace her identity. Every part of it, She didn't ought hide her heritage. She wore it proudly. She shared her family, us traditions. She talked about her mother, us and father, us homelands, helping her classmates understand that she was more than just one thing. Kamala taught them that being different wasn't a weakness. It was her strength. Her mother, Aos' influence was strong, guiding Kamala through these challenges. Shyamala would say, "You are enough, Kamala. You are more than enough." Those words sank deep into Kamala Aos' soul, filling her with a confidence that would guide her in years to come. She wasn't just a mix of cultures. She was a symbol of possibility, of what it meant to be truly American. She was someone who could embrace multiple identities, who could be Indian, Jamaican, and American, without losing a single part of herself. Through these experiences, Kamala grew stronger. She became more than just a girl caught between cultures. She became a bridge, a link between worlds. She knew that her voice was needed, that her perspective was valuable, that her story was important. In a world that often tried to define her, to put her in a box, Kamala refused to be limited. She would be her own person, create her own path, carry her family, Eos' legacy with pride. By the time she was a young woman, Kamala knew that her heritage was a gift that she would carry into every space she entered. She had learned the power of her identity, the richness of her culture, the strength of her family, Eos' story. She was more than just Kamala. She was Kamala Devi Harris, a daughter of India, of Jamaica, of Oakland, California. And she knew that this mix, this blend, this mosaic of cultures would make her stronger, wiser, and more resilient. In the end, Kamala realized that she was a living testament to her family, Eos' journeys, their sacrifices, their dreams. She was the sum of all those who had come before her, all those who had fought, who had dreamed, who had believed. Kamala was ready to take on the world, to face whatever challenges lay ahead, carrying her heritage with pride, with honor, with love. She knew that wherever life took her, she would always be, at heart, the girl who stood tall at the crossroads of cultures. Chapter 4. The Law Calls. Kamala Harris had always known she wanted to make a difference. But how? How could one person bring real change? Growing up, Eod watched her parents fight for justice, seen their courage, their passion. Now she was ready to find her own path, her own way to stand up for what was right. And then, slowly, like a whisper, like a call in the night, she felt it. The law. The law was where she belonged. Kamala entered Howard University in Washington, D.C., a place buzzing with ideas, with energy, with purpose. Howard was more than just a school. It was a world of possibility. Here, Kamala felt the power of her history, her culture, her community. She walked through the campus with pride, feeling connected to something bigger than herself. Howard was a place where black voices were heard, where students dreamed of changing the world. And Kamala was one of them, ready to learn, ready to grow, ready to find her voice. It was here, at Howard, that Kamala decided her path. She would become a lawyer. She would stand in court. She would fight for justice. She would defend the innocent. Kamala wanted to be more than just a voice in the crowd. She wanted to be a force, someone who could make a difference, someone who could speak for those who had no voice. She felt a thrill, a sense of purpose that filled her heart. This was it. This was her calling. After Howard, Kamala took her next step, law school. She attended the University of California, Hastings College of the Law in San Francisco. Law school was a new world, tough, demanding, intense. The nights were long, the classes difficult, the competition fierce. But Kamala was unstoppable. She studied hard, focused, determined to succeed. She knew what was at stake. She knew that to stand in a courtroom one day, to argue cases, to represent those in need, she had to master the law. So she kept going, even when she was tired, even when it felt like the road was endless. Law school wasn't just about books and classes, though. It was about learning to think, to question, to understand the complexity of justice. Kamala faced challenges, but each one made her stronger. She learned to argue, to make her case, to find the truth. She studied the Constitution, civil rights, criminal law, and more. She didn't just want to be a lawyer. She wanted to be a lawyer who could change things, and she was ready to fight for it. Then, finally, the day came. Kamala graduated from law school and passed the bar exam, officially becoming a lawyer. She felt a rush of pride, a sense of accomplishment. She was ready to take on the world. But she also knew this was only the beginning. She wanted to work for justice, but she knew the path would be hard, full of struggles, full of tough decisions. Yet, Kamala was ready. She had prepared her whole life for this, and she would not back down. Her first job as a young attorney was in the Alameda County District Attorney EU's office. She was excited, hopeful, but also nervous. This was her chance to make a difference, to fight for justice in real cases, with real people, real lives at stake. She knew the responsibility was huge, but she was determined. She stepped into the courtroom for the first time, her heart pounding, her mind racing. The courtroom was intimidating, filled with lawyers, judges, people watching her every move. But Kamala didn't waver. She stood tall, spoke with confidence, and presented her case. It wasn't always easy. As a young woman of color, Kamala faced doubt, prejudice, and skepticism. Some people didn't take her seriously. Some questioned her abilities. But Kamala didn't let them stop her. She fought hard, proving herself again and again, showing that she was more than capable, that she was ready to stand up for what was right. She handled cases that challenged her, that tested her. Each case taught her something new, showed her the power of the law, the power of standing up for justice. One of her early cases involved a young woman who had been mistreated, who felt abandoned, alone. Kamala saw the fear in her eyes, the pain in her voice, and she knew this was why she had chosen this path, to help people, to give them hope, to stand by their side when no one else would. She worked tirelessly on that case, preparing, planning, determined to win. And when she did, the feeling was unforgettable. She saw the relief, the gratitude in the young woman, Eos' eyes, and Kamala knew that she had done something meaningful, something that mattered. Kamala Eos. Reputation grew as she continued to handle difficult cases, as she fought for justice in every way she could. She became known for her dedication, her passion, her commitment to fairness. She wasn't just another lawyer. She was a warrior for justice, someone who would not back down, someone who cared deeply about the people she served. As the years passed, Kamala began to understand the depth of the system, EOS problems. She saw flaws, gaps, injustices that ran deep. She knew that real change wouldn't come easily, that it would require courage, patience, persistence. But Kamala was ready for that fight. She knew that she couldn't give up, that each step, each case, was a chance to make a difference, to build a better, fairer world. In the courtroom, Kamala became a fierce advocate, a powerful voice for those who had none. She was relentless, sharp, focused. But outside of the courtroom, she was a woman who cared, who listened, who understood the struggles of those around her. She knew that justice wasn't just about winning cases. It was about changing lives, about giving people hope, about building a world where everyone could feel safe, protected, valued. And so, Kamala Harris, a girl from Oakland, a daughter of immigrants, a young woman who had once questioned where she belonged, had found her place. She had answered the call of the law, a call that would lead her to places she could have only dreamed of. She knew the journey was far from over, that many battles still lay ahead. But she was ready to keep fighting, to keep believing, to keep standing up for what was right. Kamala Eos' path was set, her purpose clear. She would be more than just a lawyer. She would be a leader, an advocate, a champion for justice. And with every step, every case, every victory, she was moving closer to the future. A future where her voice, her story, would inspire millions. The law had called, and Kamala Harris had answered. Chapter 5. The Battle Begins. Kamala Harris was ready. She had the skills, the passion, and the drive. But stepping into the world of criminal justice as a young prosecutor was not for the faint-hearted. Every case, every file, every person she defended or prosecuted came with a weight, a responsibility. Kamala knew she was not just there to win cases. She was there to find justice. But the path was steep, filled with obstacles, and the stakes were higher than she had ever imagined. Her role as a prosecutor in the Alameda County District Attorney EOS office was a test of her patience, her strength, her courage. She was young, a woman of color, stepping into a world that was often male, often white, and almost always tough. Kamala felt the eyes on her, the doubt, the judgment. But she was determined. She had worked too hard, come too far, to be intimidated now. This was her moment, her chance to prove herself. One of Kamala Eos' first cases came swiftly. A case that was hard, complex, full of heartache. It involved a woman who had been deeply wronged, a woman who felt abandoned by the system, a woman who had lost all hope. Kamala listened to her story, felt the pain in her voice, the desperation in her eyes. And in that moment, Kamala knew. This was why she was here. She was here to give people like this woman a voice, to make sure justice wasn't just a word, but something real, something people could trust. Kamala worked tirelessly on that case, preparing late into the night, reading every detail, every piece of evidence, determined to find the truth. She wasn't just fighting for a victory in court. Ishe was fighting for a person, for a life. The courtroom was intense, the pressure heavy. But Kamala stood tall, her voice clear, her arguments strong. She fought with everything she had, her heart and mind focused on one goal: justice. And when the verdict came in, victory, she had won. But it wasn't just a win for her. It was a win for the woman who felt lost, a win for the community, a win for justice. That victory gave Kamala a sense of purpose, a feeling that she was exactly where she was meant to be. But as more cases came, she began to see the flaws in the system, cracks that were often overlooked, ignored. She saw people who needed help, who deserved second chances, and others who had slipped through the cracks, lost in the shuffle. She knew that real justice wasn't black and white. It was complicated, layered, full of gray areas that had to be handled with care. The more Kamala learned, the more determined she became. She didn't just want to prosecute. She wanted to reform. She saw that the system wasn't always fair, that it didn't always work for everyone. And she wanted to change that. But change wasn't easy. She faced resistance from within, from people who were comfortable with the way things were, who didn't want a young prosecutor questioning their methods, challenging their beliefs. Kamala ideas, her desire to make the system fairer, met with pushback. This is how things are done. They say, dismissing her concerns. But Kamala wouldn't back down. She couldn't She had seen the effects of a flawed system, felt the weight of it. She was fighting for more than just her career. She was fighting for the people who had no one else to stand up for them. She continued to push, to question, to demand better, knowing that every step forward was worth it, even if it was hard, even if it came with a price. There were days when Kamala felt the weight of it all, the pressure, the doubt. She was only one person. Could she really make a difference? But each time those thoughts came, she reminded herself of why she had started, of the people who were counting on her, of her parents' words, their legacy. She remembered her mother, Iwo's advice. You never let anyone tell you who you are, Kamala. You decide that. You. And with those words, she Iwa'd find her strength again, her courage renewed. Over time, Kamala Iwa's reputation grew. She became known as a fierce advocate, a prosecutor who wouldn't settle for less than justice, who fought with her heart as much as her mind. People began to see her differently, to respect her, to understand that Kamala Harris was not someone to underestimate. She was there to stay, and she was there to change things. But the journey was far from over. As she gained experience, Kamala saw even more of the system, Ios flaws. She saw lives destroyed by small mistakes, families torn apart, communities that suffered. And she knew she had to keep fighting, keep pushing for reform, for change, even if it took years, even if it was exhausting. One of her toughest cases was yet to come. A case that would test every part of her, that would challenge her like never before. It involved a young man, a teenager caught in a bad situation, a boy who had made a mistake but didn't deserve to have his whole life taken away. Kamala looked at him and saw potential, a future, a chance to make things right. But the system didn't see that. They saw him as a case, a number, a statistic. And Kamala knew she had to fight. Fight for him. Fight for a system that looked beyond numbers and saw people. She took that case, working tirelessly, arguing with everything she had. She spoke to the judge, the jury, the prosecutors, fighting for a second chance for that boy, for a chance for him to start fresh. And when the verdict came, when she won, she felt a wave of relief, of joy, of hope. She had done it. She had given someone a future, a chance, a new beginning. In that moment, Kamala knew that this was more than a job. It was a calling, a mission, a promise she had made to herself and to the world. She would continue to fight, to push for change, to make sure that justice wasn't just for some, but for everyone. Kamala was just getting started, and as she walked out of that courtroom, she felt a surge of purpose, a fire that would drive her forward. The battle had begun, and Kamala Harris was ready. She would not back down. She would not be silenced. She would fight, she would stand tall, and she would make a difference, no matter the cost. Chapter 6. The District Attorney. The year was 2004, and Kamala Harris was ready to take the next step. A leap, really, into uncharted territory. She wanted to become District Attorney of San Francisco, a role that was powerful, demanding, and in some ways, daunting. To others, it seemed impossible. A young, Black and South Asian woman running for a role that no one like her had ever held before. But Kamala didn't. Let that stop her. She saw a city that needed change, a system that needed justice, and she was willing to fight for it. The campaign was tough, exhausting. Kamala was going up against the odds, against those who said she wasn't experienced enough, wasn't tough enough. But she knew that her vision was clear. She wanted a safer San Francisco, a fairer justice system, a better future for everyone, not just a few. As she campaigned, she met with community members, listened to their concerns, felt the weight of their struggles. Kamala understood that people wanted change, real change, and she knew she could make that happen. But there was opposition, and it was fierce. Her opponents criticized her ideas, questioned her commitment, tried to cast doubt on her vision. Some said her ideas were too progressive. Others claimed she was too young to lead. They thought they could scare her off, make her doubt herself. But Kamala had faced doubts before, and each time she had overcome them. She, Eode, learned from her mother to never let others define her, and she wasn't about to start now. Campaigning was exhausting, a whirlwind of speeches, meetings, and late-night strategy sessions. Kamala poured her heart into it, refusing to let her energy fade. She spoke to crowds with passion, with conviction, with a sense of purpose that inspired people to believe in her, to trust her vision. I am here to make a difference. You to say, you not just to win an election. Her words resonated, and slowly people began to see that Kamala was more than just a candidate. She was someone who could bring real, meaningful change. And then, election night came. The air was thick with tension, excitement, nerves. Kamala waited, surrounded by her supporters, her friends, her family. The results began to roll in, numbers flashing on the screen. At first, the race was tight, each percentage point swinging back and forth. But as the night wore on, something incredible happened. Kamala Harris had won. She was the new district attorney of San Francisco, the first black woman, the first South Asian woman to ever hold the position in the city, EO's history. The room erupted in cheers, in applause, and shouts of joy. Kamala felt a rush of pride, of gratitude, of determination. She had done it. She had made history. But she knew that this was only the beginning. The real work, the hard work, was about to start. She was stepping into a role with enormous responsibilities, a role where every decision mattered, where lives were impacted by every case, every policy. And Kamala was ready to face it all. On her first day as district attorney, Kamala entered the office with a clear vision. She wanted to reform the system, to make it fairer, to protect those who had been ignored or mistreated. But it wasn't easy. She faced resistance from within, from people who didn't like change, who were used to things the way they were. Some of her own colleagues questioned her decisions, doubted her ability to lead. Kamala knew she had to be strong, to prove that she was not only capable, but dedicated to making a difference. One of her first major actions was to introduce a new policy, Ione, that shocked many, one that challenged tradition. Kamala declared that her office would no longer seek the death penalty, even in the toughest cases. To her, justice wasn't about revenge. It was about fairness, about giving people a chance to change. This decision wasn't popular with everyone, especially in high-profile cases where emotions ran high. People questioned her, criticized her, called her weak. But Kamala stood firm. She believed that the justice system should be better, that it should reflect humanity, compassion, and respect for life. The media, too, took notice. Headlines questioned her decision, and reporters asked tough questions, sometimes with disbelief. "Why would you take such a stance?" they would ask. "Oh, how can you be tough on crime if you don't believe in the ultimate punishment?" Kamala looked them in the eyes, unflinching, and explained that justice didn't have to be cruel to be effective. She believed in strong consequences, but also believed in second chances. It was a risky position, one that could have cost her career, but Kamala knew it was the right thing to do. Her vision for reform went beyond the death penalty. She also launched a program that no one expected, a program focused on young, first-time offenders. Kamala believed that these young people, who had made mistakes but had potential, deserved a second chance. The program offered counseling, education, and job training, aiming to keep them out of prison, to give them hope, to show them a path forward. It was called You Back on Track, and it was revolutionary. Critics called it soft, a waste of resources. But Kamala saw the bigger picture. She knew that true justice wasn't just about punishment. It was about helping people build better lives. You Back on Track. U was a success. Young people who might have otherwise ended up in prison found new purpose, new hope. Families were saved, futures were protected, communities were strengthened. Kamala Ayo's vision was becoming a reality, and her critics began to see that maybe, just maybe, she was on to something. Her work was making a difference, not just for individuals, but for the entire city. But not every case was easy. There were days when Kamala had to make decisions that weighed heavy on her heart, cases that brought her face to face with tragedy, with anger, with loss. She saw families torn apart, lives destroyed by violence, by crime, by a system that didn't always work the way it should. Each case reminded her why she had taken on this role, why she had fought so hard to be here. She was there to make a difference, to bring compassion and fairness to a system that desperately needed it. As district attorney, Kamala faced challenges at every turn, but she didn't, give up. She pushed through the criticism, the doubt, the resistance. She knew that change didn't, come easily, that reform wasn't, a smooth road. But with every obstacle, her determination grew, her resolve strengthened. Kamala Harris wasn't just another lawyer in a high office. Aisha was a woman on a mission, a leader who would fight for a better, fairer world, no matter the cost. Kamala O's journey as district attorney was only one chapter in her story, but it was a chapter that defined her, that prepared her for the battles to come. She had stood her ground, faced the critics, fought for her beliefs. And as she looked ahead, she knew that this was only the beginning. The path was long, the work was far from over, but Kamala Harris was ready. With courage in her heart and justice as her guide, she took each step forward, knowing that she was exactly where she was meant to be, and that nothing would stand in her way. Chapter 7. A Voice for Change. Kamala Harris was not someone to sit quietly. No. When she saw something wrong, she spoke up. And as district attorney of San Francisco, she had a vision, vision of change, of justice, of fairness, that extended beyond just the courtroom. She didn't just want to enforce the law. She wanted to transform it. But making change in a system resistant to change? That would be the hardest battle of her life. Kamala began speaking publicly about issues that others often avoided. She talked about the flaws she saw, the injustices, the cracks in the system that let so many people fall through. She questioned policies, pushed for reform, and urged her city to see that justice wasn't always about punishment. Sometimes it was about giving people a chance. Her words echoed through San Francisco, sparking conversations, igniting debates. Some people called her bold, others called her radical. But Kamala knew she was onto something. She wasn't here to make friends. She was here to make a difference. Her first major fight? Criminal justice reform. Kamala believed the system was broken, that it unfairly targeted people of color, that it punished the poor while letting others walk free. She saw young people trapped in cycles of crime, not because they wanted to be there, but because they had nowhere else to go. She saw families torn apart by harsh sentences, lives shattered by mistakes that should never have defined them. And so, Kamala raised her voice, loud and clear, demanding a system that was fair, a system that gave people hope, not despair. Her message wasn't always popular. Some people thought she was too soft, that she was risking public safety for the sake of change. They questioned her commitment, her ideas, her motives. But Kamala didn't back down. She knew she was walking a fine line, balancing justice and compassion, but she was certain of one thing: change was necessary. She believed that justice and compassion were not opposites. They could work together to build a better world, and she was determined to prove it. One of her most daring ideas was to reform sentencing for low-level offenses. She believed that people who made small mistakes, young people caught with drugs, first-time offenders, served a second chance. Instead of filling up prisons, Kamala wanted to give these people support, counseling, guidance. Not throwing lives away. Say with conviction. Building futures. This wasn't an easy message to sell. People were afraid that leniency would lead to more crime, that reform would make their city unsafe. But Kamala spoke with such passion, such belief, that she started to turn people's hearts, little by little. Kamala faced criticism, of course. Some called her ideas unrealistic. Others labeled her a dreamer. But Kamala wasn't alone in her vision. She had supporters, people who believed in her, who saw the impact of her work firsthand. Teachers, community leaders, young people. They listened to her, trusted her, saw the fire in her eyes. They knew Kamala was fighting for them, fighting for a system that didn't just punish, but helped rebuild lives. And so, her supporters stood with her, lifting her voice, amplifying her message, helping her push forward. But her work came with sacrifices. Kamala spent endless nights reading reports, reviewing cases, planning her reforms. She barely saw her family, barely slept, her mind constantly racing, constantly searching for solutions. She was pushing herself to the edge, but she knew she couldn't stop. She felt the weight of her role, the responsibility of it. She knew that each decision, each policy, affected lives, real lives, and she refused to take that lightly. One day, as Kamala walked through a community center, a young man approached her. He had been part of her Back on Track program, a program that offered counseling and job training instead of jail time for first-time offenders. This young man had been in trouble before, had faced a dark path. But with Kamala Ayos' program, he had found his way out, found a job, a purpose. "Oh, thank you, he said, his voice filled with emotion. You gave me a second chance. You gave me my life back." Kamala felt tears in her eyes. This was why she fought. This was why she refused to give up, because every life saved, every life changed was worth all the criticism, all the sacrifice. But as Kamala Ayos' influence grew, so did the pushback. People in power, people who didn't like her reforms, started to speak out against her, publicly questioning her methods. They said she was dangerous, that she was putting San Francisco at risk. But Kamala stood firm. She wasn't here to win their approval. She was here to do what was right. She believed in her vision, and she knew that every great change faced resistance. And so, she continued to push forward, her voice unwavering, her heart set on justice. Her journey was far from easy, but Kamala never lost hope. She believed in her work, believed in her city, believed in the people she was fighting for. She knew that change didn't come overnight. It was a struggle, a battle, something you had to fight for, day after day, without losing sight of the goal. And that is exactly what Kamala did. She fought, not just for herself, but for every person who felt unheard, unseen, forgotten. She was their voice, their champion, their hope for a better future. In the end, Kamala Harris wasn't just a district attorney. Ishe was a leader, a reformer, a voice for change. She had taken on the system, challenged its flaws, and fought to make it better. Her journey was far from over, but one thing was certain. Kamala Harris was not just a voice in the crowd. She was a voice that would never be silenced. And with every word, every step, every battle, she proved that sometimes one voice, one determined voice, was all it took to change the world. Chapter 8. California EOS Top Cop. Kamala Harris had already made history as District Attorney of San Francisco, but she wasn't finished yet. Her dreams, her vision, went beyond the boundaries of one city. She saw all of California, a state with over 39 million people, a state with incredible diversity, but also deep challenges. Kamala knew that California needed someone bold, someone fearless, someone who understood justice and was ready to fight for it. She wanted to become the Attorney General of California, the state EOS top cop. This was her next battle, and it would be one of the hardest yet. The campaign was grueling, intense, a test of endurance. Kamala traveled up and down California, from bustling cities to small towns, meeting people from every walk of life. She listened to their stories, their struggles, their fears. Farmers, teachers, business owners, students, each person Kamala met reminded her of why she was running. She wasn't running for power. She was running for them, for their families, for a state that needed justice. And with each handshake, each conversation, her determination grew. But her opponents weren't going to make it easy. They criticized her, questioned her experience, challenged her ideas. Some even said that California wasn't ready for someone like her, that her vision was too ambitious, too different. But Kamala didn't flinch. She faced doubt before. She been the first Black and South Asian woman in many rooms, and she knew how to hold her ground. She knew that she was ready, that she was capable, and that her commitment to justice would carry her through. Election night came, and the atmosphere was electric. The polls were tight, and the outcome uncertain. Kamala stood surrounded by her friends, her family, her supporters, waiting for the results, feeling every second tick by. Then, the numbers came in. She had won. Kamala Harris was now the Attorney General of California, the first Black woman, the first South Asian woman, to hold the position in the state EOS history. She felt a rush of pride, of responsibility. She had made it. But she knew this was just the beginning. Kamala Harris' new role came with enormous responsibility. As Attorney General, She would be responsible for protecting millions of Californians, for fighting crime, for standing up for justice at a level she had never known. She would be the face of the law in California, the voice of those who needed protection, the defender of those who had nowhere else to turn. And Kamala was ready to face this challenge head-on. One of the first battles she faced was against powerful corporations who were taking advantage of people in California. They saw profits above all else, caring little for the environment, for workers, for communities that were suffering. Kamala took a stand, launching investigations, holding these companies accountable. She pushed them, pressured them, refused to back down. And when they tried to intimidate her, tried to make her second-guess herself, Kamala only grew stronger. She was not afraid of powerful opponents. She was here to protect the people, no matter what. But her biggest test as Attorney General came during the foreclosure crisis. Thousands of families across California were losing their homes, victims of greedy banks that had handed out risky loans without care, without responsibility. Kamala saw the devastation, the heartbreak. She saw families with nowhere to go, people who had lost everything. And she knew she had to act. Kamala launched a fierce investigation, demanding that the banks take responsibility, that they help the families they had hurt. She gathered evidence, building a case, refusing to settle for less than justice. The banks offered her a settlement, a sum of money they thought would be enough to make her stop, to make her go away. But Kamala was relentless. She said no. She demanded more, fought harder, pushed further. And finally, she won a historic settlement for California, billions of dollars, to help families get back on their feet, to rebuild their lives. It was a victory that showed the nation who Kamala Harris was, a fighter, a protector, a voice for those who couldn't fight for themselves. Her work wasn't always easy, and it wasn't always popular. Some people thought she was too tough, that she pushed too hard, that she wasn't willing to compromise. But Kamala knew that true justice wasn't about making everyone happy. It was about doing what was right, even when it was hard, even when it made her enemies. She understood that every decision, every choice affected real people, and she refused to let them down. In her role, Kamala also took on cases that were deeply personal, cases that touched the hearts of families across the state. She fought for stricter regulations on guns, knowing that every life lost to gun violence was a life too many. She defended children who had been exploited, women who had been mistreated, communities that had been ignored. She worked tirelessly, putting in long hours, facing difficult cases, standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. And every victory, every life she protected, reminded her of why she had chosen this path. But Kamala Harris's work as Attorney General was about more than just winning cases. It was about changing the way justice was delivered, making it fairer, more compassionate, more accessible. She introduced new programs, new policies, ways to reform the system from the inside. She believed in giving people second chances, in helping young people avoid prison, in building a system that cared not just about punishment, but about healing, about growth. Her vision was bold, and it wasn't easy to implement. but she fought for it with every ounce of her strength. Through it all, Kamala remained focused, grounded, determined. She knew that every battle she fought, every reform she pushed, was a step toward a better California, a better future. And as the years went on, her influence grew, her reputation spread. People began to see Kamala Harris not just as a lawyer, not just as a leader, but as a symbol of hope, of resilience, of what it meant to fight for justice with courage and conviction. Kamala Harris had become more than California, EO's top cop. She had become a champion for the people, a force for change, a voice that would not be silenced. And though her journey was far from over, she knew one thing for certain. She was exactly where she was meant to be, fighting for justice, one battle at a time. Chapter 9. To Washington, with purpose, UIUA. Kamala Harris was no stranger to challenges, no stranger to breaking barriers, to speaking up, to fighting for what was right. As Attorney General, she had protected the people of California, fought against injustice, and demanded accountability from the powerful. But now, Kamala felt something bigger calling her. She felt the pull toward Washington, D.C., toward the Senate, toward a new stage where her voice could reach even further. Kamala knew she could make a difference there, and so she decided to take the leap, to run for the U.S. Senate, to represent California and fight for the nation she loved. The campaign was intense, exhausting, and full of moments that tested her strength. She was up against seasoned politicians, people who had spent years in the system, people who didn't yet see her as a real contender. They underestimated her, thought she was too bold, too progressive, too unwilling to compromise. But Kamala had faced doubt before. She knew how to silence it, to turn it into fuel for her ambition. And this time was no different. She would show them all just how serious she was. Kamala took her campaign across California, from the bustling streets of Los Angeles to the rolling vineyards of Napa, to the quiet towns tucked away in the mountains. She met with people from every background, every walk of life. Farmers, teachers, doctors, immigrants, young people, elders. Each person had a story, a struggle, a dream. Kamala listened to them all, absorbing their words, their worries, their hopes. She knew that they needed more than just promises. They needed someone who would fight for them, who would carry their voices to the halls of Congress, who would demand justice, fairness, and progress. And Kamala was determined to be that voice. The debates were fierce. Kamala faced opponents who tried to bring her down, who questioned her ideas, who threw doubts at her. But she remained strong, poised, and passionate. Her speeches were filled with energy, with power, with purpose. She spoke about her vision for America, a country where everyone could succeed, where justice wasn't just a word but a reality, where every person had a chance at a better life. Her words resonated, striking a chord with the people of California. They could see her sincerity, her strength, her unwavering commitment. Kamala wasn't a youth, just running for a seat in the Senate. Isha was running for them. Election night arrived, and the anticipation was electric. Kamala stood with her team, her family, her friends, surrounded by people who believed in her, who had fought alongside her, who had supported her every step of the way. The votes came in slowly at first, each update bringing a fresh wave of tension. And then it happened. The results were announced. Kamala Harris had won. She was the new senator from California, the second black woman in U.S. history to hold that position. The room erupted with cheers, applause, shouts of joy and pride. Kamala felt a mix of emotions, gratitude, excitement, determination. She had done it. She had taken another step toward her vision for justice. But she knew this was only the beginning. Arriving in Washington, D.C. was surreal. The Capitol stood tall, majestic, a symbol of democracy and freedom. Kamala felt the weight of history, of responsibility. She was here not just as a politician, but as a representative of her state, of her people, of the countless individuals who had placed their trust in her. She walked into the Senate with her head held high, ready to bring the same courage, the same passion, the same determination that had guided her throughout her life. Her first days in the Senate were eye-opening. Kamala saw firsthand the power of the institution, but also its flaws, its divisions, its resistance to change. She quickly realized that making progress here would not be easy. But Kamala was not someone who backed down from a challenge. She threw herself into her work, joining committees, drafting bills, working late into the night, fueled by the desire to make a difference. She knew that she was here for a reason, that her voice was needed, that her purpose was clear. Kamala became known for her sharp questions, her direct approach, her refusal to be intimidated. In committee hearings, she asked tough questions, cutting through excuses, demanding answers, pushing for accountability. She questioned officials, challenged leaders, and brought a new level of scrutiny to the Senate. Some admired her strength, others found her intimidating. But Kamala didn't care about their opinions. She was there to do her job, to fight for the people who had elected her, to hold the powerful accountable. One of her proudest moments in the Senate came during a heated debate on health care. Kamala believed deeply that health care was a right, not a privilege, and she fought tirelessly to expand access, to protect those who couldn't afford care, to ensure that no one was left behind. She stood on the Senate floor, speaking passionately, sharing stories of people she had met, people who were struggling, people who needed help. Her words were powerful, resonating with senators and citizens alike. She spoke with such conviction that even some of her opponents paused, reconsidering their positions. But her work in the Senate was not without challenges. Kamala faced criticism, pushback, even personal attacks. There were those who tried to silence her, who questioned her motives, who accused her of being too ambitious, too aggressive. But Kamala had heard it all before. She didn't let it shake her. She remained focused, resilient, determined. She knew that her work was too important to let distractions hold her back. Over time, Kamala Aya's reputation grew. She became known as a fighter, a leader, a voice that wouldn't be silenced. She pushed for criminal justice reform, immigration reform, health care, climate action, issues that mattered deeply to her. issues that affected millions of Americans. She wasn't afraid to speak out, to challenge the status quo, to demand change. Kamala Harris was in Washington with a purpose, and she wasn't leaving until she had made an impact. And though her days in the Senate were filled with long hours, tough battles, and constant pressure, Kamala felt alive, driven by a sense of mission, of destiny. She knew that she was part of something bigger than herself, a movement for justice, for equality, for a better America. And each day, each debate, each vote brought her closer to that vision. As she looked out over the Capitol, Kamala felt a sense of pride, of purpose. She was here, not just for herself, but for every person who had ever felt unheard, unseen, forgotten. She was their voice, their champion. And she knew that her journey was far from over. This was just the beginning. A new chapter in a story of resilience, courage, and hope. Kamala Harris was in Washington, and she was ready to fight for a future that belonged to everyone. Chapter 10. The Presidential Race. In 2019, Kamala Harris made a bold announcement that shook the nation. She was running for President of the United States. It was a moment filled with excitement, with hope, with purpose. Kamala had spent her life fighting for justice, for fairness, for those who felt forgotten. Now, she wanted to bring that fight to the highest office in the country. She wanted to be president, to lead a nation that needed change, needed unity, needed hope. It was a huge step, a brave decision, but Kamala was ready. She knew that this race would be unlike any she'd faced before, but she also knew she was ready for it. The campaign trail was grueling, intense, a journey of endless speeches, debates, town halls, and rallies. Kamala traveled across the country, from coast to coast, meeting people from every corner of America. She listened to farmers in Iowa, to teachers in Michigan, to factory workers in Ohio. She listened to their struggles, their fears, their dreams. She spoke about her vision for a better America, a country where everyone, no matter their background, had a chance to succeed. Her words were powerful, her energy contagious. She was on fire, inspiring crowds, lifting hearts. Everywhere she went, people were chanting her name, cheering her on, believing in her vision. But the path was not easy. Kamala faced fierce competition from other candidates, each with their own ideas, their own dreams for America. The debates were intense, filled with challenges, questions, attacks. Kamala stood on stage with some of the most experienced politicians in the country, facing tough questions, defending her ideas, pushing back against criticism. Some days, it felt like the entire world was watching, waiting for her to make a mistake. But Kamala was unshakable. She answered with strength, with clarity, with conviction. She showed America that she was not only ready for this role, she was ready to lead. During one of the debates, Kamala shared a story from her childhood, a story about being bused to school as part of a desegregation program. She described what it felt like to be that little girl, riding the bus, facing the challenges of a divided society, feeling the weight of history. Her voice trembled with emotion, and the audience was silent, hanging on her every word. In that moment, Kamala wasn't just a candidate. She was a symbol of hope, a voice for those who had felt excluded, unseen. She was telling a story that resonated with millions, a story that was not just her own, but America EOS. Yet, despite the passion, the commitment, the energy, Kamala EOS' campaign faced hurdles. The media questioned her, picking apart her policies, analyzing her every word. Some critics said she was too progressive. Others claimed she wasn't progressive enough. The scrutiny was relentless, the pressure immense. There were moments when Kamala felt the weight of it all, moments when the path seemed impossibly steep. But each time, she reminded herself why she had started this journey, why she was here. She was here for the people, for their stories, for their dreams, and that was all she needed to keep going. The supporters who came to her rallies fueled her spirit. They held signs, chanted her name, cheered with passion. Kamala! 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 Their voices were a reminder that this campaign was bigger than her. She wasn't a youth just running for president. She was running for every person who had ever felt left out, every child who dreamed of a better future, every family working hard to make ends meet. Kamala knew that she was their voice, their hope, and she would not let them down. But as the campaign went on, the race grew tougher. The field of candidates narrowed, and the competition grew fiercer. Kamala knew that she had to make a difficult decision. Despite her drive, her passion, her commitment, the road ahead became clear. Her campaign did not have the resources, the momentum to go all the way. It was a heartbreaking decision, one that felt like a loss, a moment of sorrow. But Kamala knew that sometimes leadership meant making hard choices. She made the announcement, her voice filled with emotion, thanking her supporters, expressing her gratitude, her hope for the future. When Kamala stepped away from the race, her heart was heavy, but her spirit remained strong. She knew that her journey was not over. She had seen the faces of her supporters, felt the strength of their dreams, their hopes, and she knew that she could still make a difference. She didn't need to be president to fight for the America she believed in. She would find another way to serve, another way to lead, another way to be the voice of change. And then, a few months later, something unexpected happened. A call. From Joe Biden, the Democratic nominee for president. He wanted her to be his running mate. Kamala felt a surge of emotion, a mixture of excitement, of purpose, of honor. She knew what this meant, not just for her, but for millions of people across the country. If they won, she would become the first female vice president, the first Black and South Asian American in that role. It was history in the making, a moment that would echo through time. Kamala accepted the offer, stepping into a new role, a new chapter, a new challenge. The campaign trail started again, this time with Joe Biden by her side. Together, they took their message across America, fighting for a country that was divided, that needed healing, that needed hope. Kamala spoke with a renewed sense of purpose, her voice strong, her message clear. She told America that they could come together, that they could rise above the challenges, that a better future was possible. Election night arrived, and the world held its breath. Kamala watched the results come in, surrounded by her family, her friends, her supporters. Each state brought a wave of emotion, I hope, fear, excitement. And then, finally, the results were clear. Kamala Harris was the Vice President-elect of the United States. She had made history, broken barriers, achieved what had once seemed impossible. The cheers, the tears, the pride, Kamala felt it all. She looked out at the faces of the people who had supported her, who had believed in her, and she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. She knew that this victory was not hers alone. It belonged to every person who had dared to dream, to hope, to believe in a better future. Kamala Harris had taken on the fight of her life, had faced every challenge with courage, with strength, with purpose. And now, she stood on the brink of a new beginning, ready to lead, ready to inspire, ready to make history. The journey was far from over, but Kamala Harris was exactly where she was meant to be. Chapter 11. An Unexpected Call. Kamala Harris was stepping back, taking a breath, reflecting on her journey. The campaign had been intense, filled with highs, lows, moments of triumph, and moments of pain. She had given it her all, leaving everything on the field. But even though she had stepped away from her presidential campaign, Kamala knew her work was far from over. Little did she know, a life-changing call was about to come. It was a quiet day, just another day in a whirlwind of reflection, planning, and wondering what would come next. But then, her phone rang. She picked it up, hearing a familiar voice on the other end. Joe Biden. He wasn't a yote, just calling to say hello. He had a question that held the weight of history, a question that would shape Kamala's future in ways she could barely imagine.